Hi, it's Katrina. Number 8. Exorcism Manual. Robert Harley was an English nobleman who acquired a collection of more than 600 manuscripts by 1753. After he died, his son sold them to the British Museum, where experts have been working for over 2 centuries to decipher and translate the texts. Written in multiple European languages, the writings cover a wide array of topics, including alchemy, medicine, religion, and more. One manuscript, catalogued simply as Harley MS 2874, was never decoded because it simply made no sense. The words appear to be made up of letters that are randomly jumbled together, and experts couldn't get any intelligible message from it. It was considered an unsolvable mystery. But in 2019, staff at the British Museum solved the mystery. They took another look at the manuscript and were able to decipher it after realizing that the encryption system that the writer used is simpler and more straightforward than they originally thought. They soon realized that the strange book is an exorcism manual, and it's a copy of the original, which is in the secret vault of the Vatican. As it turns out, it's not so secret after all. While the handwritten manuscript is written in code, 30 unencrypted copies were printed during the 15th and 16th centuries. Researchers believe that a monk likely created the handwritten copy, and that he probably encrypted the text so that bad people can't use the exorcism techniques for evil purposes, which was a genuine fear among the devout at that time. Number 7. Bohemian Grove. Set back in a remote redwood forest in Monte Rio, California, is a 2,700-acre campground called Bohemian Grove. For 2 weeks every July, wealthy and powerful politicians, businessmen, and other elites gather there to socialize, drink, and engage in other activities away from the prying eyes of the public. The tradition started in 1872, when a group of San Francisco-based intellectuals and artists started gathering in the woods to bond over their shared interests. The male-only group's dynamics changed when they decided to open membership up to men with a lot of money and influence. It didn't take long before these well-off recruits took over the club's leadership and ousted its more bohemian or hippie members. Past members include Nelson Rockefeller, Richard Nixon, Walter Cronkite, Theodore Roosevelt, Colin Powell, and Dwight D. Eisenhower, just to name a few. Nobody knows exactly what goes on at the Bohemian Grove gathering. Only men are allowed to attend, and it's said that the event's motto discourages work of any kind while it's going on. In other words, it sounds like a place for members of America's upper crust to let loose, without having to worry about media scrutiny or any other problems that might happen if they partied in plain view. It reportedly costs $25,000 just to join the Bohemian Grove, and members are required to pay annual dues. There are an estimated 2,500 members, and the only way to get in is to be recommended by someone who's already in the club. A former member who spoke with All That's Interesting said that the waiting list to get in is between 20 and 30 years. Based on what he told the website, it sounds like nothing too scandalous goes on at the gathering besides some seriously heavy drinking. Then again, he could just be saying that to cover up the truth. Number 6. The true Tiananmen death count. During the 1980s, the Communist Chinese government began to allow some private and foreign investments in hopes of improving the country's economy and raising its standard of living. But with the changes came corruption, and at the same time, a lot of young people hoped that the new policies symbolized progress toward more political openness. Students began protesting for more freedom and less censorship. When a progressive politician who helped push the recent changes through was found dead in 1989, these demonstrations grew. Angry activists gathered at Tiananmen Square in Beijing, with crowds peaking at an estimated 1 million. Authorities hesitated to take action at first, but some officials pushed for a hardline response and got their wish. Martial law was declared in May of that year as the Chinese army began advancing toward the square. Troops resorted to violence to regain control of the area, opening fire on protesters, crushing people, and doing whatever else they felt was necessary to carry out their orders. In one famous photo, a young man can be seen facing off with an entire line of military tanks before being dragged away by 2 men. After shutting down the demonstration with brute force, Chinese officials claimed that an estimated 200 to 300 people were killed, including several dozen security personnel. Others have reported fatalities numbering in the thousands, and to this day, nobody knows for sure exactly how many people died. In 2017, newly declassified British documents revealed that a diplomatic cable put the Tiananmen Square massacre death toll at around 10,000. British Ambassador Sir Alan Donald sent the message a little over a day after the tragedy, citing a friend of a Chinese government insider as his source. He went on to clarify that the person had proven to be a reliable source in the past, and that he was mindful to differentiate facts from speculation and rumor. The disturbing note describes how protesters were given 5 minutes to leave the square and had not yet cleared out when the military began mowing people down and repeatedly running over their bodies, which were reportedly later collected using a bulldozer. Some people begged for their lives, only to be mercilessly slaughtered on the spot. The Chinese government actively removes internet posts about the massacre, discourages discussion about it, and has taken down one of the only memorials to the victims in Hong Kong. Sadly, many, if not most, members of the younger generation are kept largely in the dark about the injustices that occurred that day, and it's clear that the country's leaders don't want the rest of the world to know the details either. Number 5. Deadly Syphilis Study. In 1932, researchers from the U.S. Public Health Service and the Tuskegee Institute set out to study the natural course that syphilis will take in humans if left untreated. But in order to do that, they needed people to die from it so they could perform autopsies. They recruited 600 African American men, including 399 who had the disease and 201 who did not, in what the recruits thought was a program to treat bad blood, as it was called back then. They received free medical exams, meals, and burial insurance in exchange for their participation. But most of the men with syphilis never received proper treatment for the disease, even after penicillin became widely available in 1943 and could have easily cured them. In the meantime, the personnel running the study had the participants under the impression that they were receiving adequate care. As a result, at least 28 of the men died from syphilis, while dozens of others died from complications related to the disease. Of course, the public was largely unaware of the experiment. The disturbing study was only meant to last for 6 months, but it continued for 40 years. Finally, in 1972, an Associated Press journalist blew the whistle on the case with a damning article that provoked widespread public outrage. The program ended 3 months later, and survivors were given lifelong health care, but by then, a lot of the damage was already done. Participants sued the government and settled out of court for $10 million. Lawmakers implemented new legislation requiring informed consent for participation in studies and other policies meant to prevent something like this from ever happening again. It wasn't until 1997 that a formal apology was given to the victims on behalf of the government by President Bill Clinton. Number 4. Government-sanctioned assassination plots. When Fidel Castro rose to power and began implementing socialism in Cuba with financial backing from the Soviet Union, U.S. intelligence officials began to increasingly see him as a thorn in their side that it would simply be easier to do away with. The CIA entertained numerous potential ways of carrying out the assassination, including, at one point, planting an explosive seashell in his favorite diving area, which would be activated by touch. None of the plans ever panned out, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. On one occasion, the agency tried to somehow get Castro to smoke an explosive cigar laced with a deadly toxin. They lost track of the cigars while they were supposedly en route to their destination, and nobody knows what became of the intended murder weapon. Agents also considered involving mafia hitmen, compromising the dictator's scuba diving gear, and having an attractive woman set him up to get him killed. Altogether, at least 364 attempts were made on Castro's life, with some experts putting the number as high as 600. Not all of them were carried out on behalf of the U.S., but enough people wanted the revolutionary leader dead for him to pretty much be a constant target. In recent years, paperwork detailing the CIA's desire to permanently remove Castro from power has been declassified, revealing the sinister, bizarre, and arguably reckless murder plans that until then, U.S. citizens had no knowledge of. Number 3. Fake Titanic search. For years following the 1985 discovery of the RMS Titanic, people thought that it simply meant a successful mission for Robert Ballard, the U.S. Navy commander and Woods Hole scientist who found the wreck. But the military had funded Ballard's search for the Titanic under the condition that he first participate in a mission to recover 2 American nuclear submarines from the ocean floor. Shortly after the true nature of the operation was declassified in 2018, he told CNN that he was tasked with locating the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion, which sank during the 1960s, while using the Titanic expedition as a convenient cover story. U.S. authorities didn't want the Russians to track Ballard's movements as he sought to investigate the nuclear weapons that went down with the Scorpion and observe their effects on the environment. After carrying out his assigned duties, he had just 12 days to locate the Titanic within the vast, deep northern Atlantic. Days after news broke of the discovery, some news outlets had gotten wind of possible secret military involvement and perhaps ulterior motives for facilitating Ballard's exploration. Officials were quick to squash these suspicions, only to admit years later that there really was more to the story. Number 2. Literary warfare. As the US and Soviet Union came increasingly close to blows during the Cold War, while avoiding physical warfare at all costs, the two countries came up with some creative ways to one-up each other without using direct violence. In 2014, newly declassified documents revealed that the CIA printed Russian-language copies of the Boris Pasternak novel Dr. Zhivago and distributed them to civilians throughout the Soviet Union. The meddling began in the late 1950s. At the time, the book was banned throughout the USSR because it was seen as containing anti-revolutionary sentiments, and the CIA saw it as the perfect way to plant doubt in the minds of Soviet citizens and to make them question their own government, according to the declassified materials. They believed that people would really appreciate the book and that it would instill them with reminders that people deserve freedom and privacy from the state. Confident that the story would counter the Soviet philosophy of excessive self-sacrifice for the greater good, agents passed copies out to Russian tourists at the 1958 Brussels Universal and International Exposition. As part of their training, CIA officers were instructed on how to strike up conversations about literature with any Soviet visitors or officials they might encounter in the West. They were encouraged to discuss topics like communism versus freedom of expression, as well as the plight of individuals who are forced to live in communist societies, according to a 1959 memo. While it has long been known that the U.S. government handed out thousands of books as a sort of cultural warfare tactic during the Cold War, it wasn't until recent years that the CIA documents about it were declassified. British historian and journalist Frances Stoner Saunders, who has written extensively about the Cold War, told The Guardian that the agency's timing for releasing the documents made her suspicious. She explained that the timing was potentially beneficial for American foreign policy and added that the CIA only releases information when it benefits them in some way. And based on their history, it's hard to disagree. Number 1. Project Azorian. In 1968, a Soviet submarine known as K-129 sank roughly 1,600 miles northwest of Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean. 4 years later, the CIA embarked on a top-secret mission to recover the submerged vessel from the ocean floor. Codenamed Project Azorian, it was one of the most expensive and complicated Cold War operations undertaken by the U.S. government. The Soviets didn't know where the wreck was located, but American surveillance equipment had detected the explosion that happened the day the submarine sank, so authorities knew exactly where to look. They recovered part of the ship, but 2/3 of it broke off and descended back to the sea during the recovery. In a proposal set forth by Defense Secretary Melvin Laird and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, the operation's purpose was to obtain a nuclear missile on board the vessel, as well as cryptographic materials. The project received widespread media attention, but the CIA strived to keep almost all the details of it confidential, including the specifics about what they recovered during the mission and how successful it was. Some people, including a respected Time magazine journalist, suspected that Project Azorian itself was meant to function as a cover-up for another secret mission, and to keep people distracted from something else going on. These allegations have never been proven, but it's hard not to wonder when the publicly disclosed details surrounding the operation remain murky to this day. Thanks for watching! Which of these forbidden pieces of history surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye!